Hi everyone. You know, have you had that situation where you're very thirsty and you go for salt water and you keep drinking salt water with the hope that that salt water will quench your thirst? You know, one of the things that I know that salt water does is that it never satisfies, because you could keep taking it, and rather than feeling satisfied, it keeps you thirsty because that salt keeps you dry. Now that's what most of us do. You know, when we find ourselves in unhealthy sexual patterns, it's like finding yourself in a place of thirst and you're looking for a way to get out of that thirst, right? But you're taking salt water in that place for it. So hi, once again. Welcome to EX-HALE Online with Poavi. And we've been talking for a while on breaking the pattern. And we've been specifying on breaking unhealthy sexual patterns. So before I continue, I'd like to first and foremost say, if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please kindly subscribe to the YouTube channel, and as much as possible, try to invite people. And if you have enjoyed the topic so far, please do me a favor by clicking your share button and like and share so that others can watch. And I'd like to apologize. We actually had the broadcast by 5:30 Nigerian time. However, I had a little issue with my mic, so for some reason I was not audible at the first part of the recording till much later, and it was drawn to my attention that I was not really hearing, people were not hearing my voice. So I decided to do another video today by 8 p.m. so that I could go back to what I was saying, so that you do not miss too much of it. Last week on Wednesday, we talked about why young adults get stuck in these sexual behavioral patterns. And one of the things we talked about was the emotional reasons. And emotional would be, you know, that need to feel self-love, attention, affection, you know, dealing with, you know, dejection and all that. And, you know, I said people do it for several reasons. One of the reasons would even be stress relief. Amazingly, some people try to do it to relieve stress. And we talked about mental, which, like I said, you know, keeping yourself in a loop, like what I talked about. You know, you're thirsty, but you keep going for salt water, and rather than curing that thirst, what you do is you find yourself thirsty all over again. And this thirst is that mental loop where you find yourself in the world of your triggers. Your triggers now lead you to your urges, and your urges now lead you to the reward, which is what most of us do, and find ourselves in that loop and in that circle. Now, the mental reasons are usually brain habits, where our brain has already accepted the fact that every time I am in a place like that sends that trigger to me, either or I'm in a porn site, or I'm talking on the phone with the opposite sex, and we are talking, you know, sexually, or I am reading a magazine that is dealing with sexual instances, or, you know, anything that would trigger those unhealthy patterns. And the moment you feel those triggers, the next thing that kicks in are the urges. And once those urges are there, the next thing is, how do I satisfy those urges, which we call the reward. And the mind has processed this pattern, and it rotates, so it's familiar with it, so that every time I find myself in that area, then this is the system that follows. triggers, urges, reward, triggers, urges, reward, and it's a repeated circle. That's why I said it's like you're very thirsty, and you go for salt water. Ask to a nice cold bottle of water from the refrigerator. You take the salt water, and that salt water keeps you in a place of thirst and dehydration, because you can never be satisfied with salt water. So that's what our mental reasons are. You never get satisfied as long as you find yourself in that environment of your emotional triggers and your sexual triggers. Definitely there's that loophole there. And we also talked about social. And social, I dealt a lot about it. I talked about peer pressure. I talked about social media influence, and the social media playing a major role as to putting sex out there for people to find themselves kind of wrapped up in that pattern. Another thing we talked about was spiritual reasons, and I think that was the last thing I talked about, where I said people are out of tune with their purpose, they're out of tune with their maker, and so they find themselves wrapped up in a sexual circle to find that satisfaction and that gratification. And I said, when one loses sight of their value, their spiritual value, their purpose, their core being for their existence, you give yourself up to all sorts of temptations, and most of the temptations would actually be towards the other sex, or habits that would have a way of sucking you into that trap of unhealthy sexual patterns. Now, today I want to move along, and I want to talk about the impact of staying in the circle. Now, like I said, it's a loop, and it keeps you going in and out as long as you allow yourself to live within the confines of that world that you have found yourself, where your triggers are like your major to go to. I have to watch porn, I have to have phone sex, I have to have physical sex, I have to go to the club, I have to go to a strip club, I have to go to a bar. Those things that keep you that enhance that pattern. As long as you are stuck in those places, definitely you will find yourself within that circle. Now, one of the circles we talked about is still, again, why people get stuck into it, and one of those circles would be your emotional state. And I said earlier, one of the emotional traps that happen after you find yourself in this loop would be guilt. And why guilt? Somebody would say, oftentimes we are guilty of these things because we know that we're not supposed to be doing it. Remember, I told you, I said the sole purpose of marriage, is when you are married. That is when sex becomes a beautiful thing. It's when it becomes a celebrated thing. Anything outside that, is frowned upon by society, whether it's cultural belief, whether it's traditional belief, whether it's spiritual belief. And so that guilt that you are betraying either your faith, your family, your society, your people, yourself, always has a way it eats. So you find out that most people who indulge in these unhealthy sexual patterns, pornography, masturbation, multiple sex partners, just in and out of it, find out most of them in their closets deal with that self-guilt. This, oh my God, why am I doing this? I know I'm better than this. I know I shouldn't be doing this. I know I am far better than where I am. And, because we know these things, we beat ourselves about it. Now, guilt now gives birth to shame. And like I told you, anything that is outside the intention of God and the purpose of God definitely will bring shame for you. Because, imagine you get pregnant. Oh, she's pregnant. If it's church, if it's your mosque, if it's your community, if it's your family, if it's wherever it is, pregnancy outside wedlock is frowned upon, right? So there's that shame. It makes you to lose your confidence because you are locked within that place of, oh my God, consequences result of this thing that I found myself engaged in. And if it's not pregnancy, it's STD, one thing or the other. But it always brings about shame. And for some people, I mean, it may not even be pregnancy. It may not be the STD. It may actually just be conscience. You know that you're better than this. Why at this age, why should you be masturbating? If people get to know, oh my God. If people catch you watching a porn, oh my God. So there's that shame that comes with it. And then another thing that emotional circles do is that it brings about heartbreak. And I talked about this in a way that people can relate. Most people who find themselves in multiple sexual partners or in one sex activity or the other, oftentimes, like I said, another circle would be relational. And I said that most people who are in relations with people who have multiple partners or engaged in unhealthy sexual partners are often victims of heartbreak. Reason because most of the time people who find themselves in these patterns find it very difficult to commit. They find it difficult to give themselves completely to a person. So you find yourself in a relationship, but you're wondering why you're not enough for that person. You're wondering why that person does not want to. I mean, you're with the person, but you're not with the person, if you understand what I mean. That person is not really giving themselves 100 to you because there is a part of that person that you will never get to experience fully. Reason because that person has a lot of entanglements going on with them sexually. And that leads me back to the spiritual aspect of it. Like I said, every time you do that, you give a part of you goes with whoever it is that you are having that sex with. And I'm talking both male and female here. So it often leads the other person goes through heartbreak because number one, you cannot get that commitment from the person you are with or the husband or the wife you are with because they're engaged in other illicit sexual activities. Then another problem that comes with heartbreak is, like I said, oftentimes people feel used, and one of the most painful ways to break up with someone is when you have been in a relationship long enough with that person and you have had intercourse with that person, and then all of a sudden you now discover that you are not alone. The person is sleeping with this person, is sleeping with that person, is sleeping with this other person. There's that pain of betrayal, that feel of, oh, you used me, oh, that pain of, so it brings about heartbreak for both parties because both you, who is the person involved in these patterns, and the person who whether it's a one-time, look, I don't care if it's a prostitute, you're using her for self-gratification at that moment. She's using you as a means of making money. So one way or the other, there is a using. And if it's masturbation, you're using yourself, you're abusing yourself, right? Somebody says, well, I wouldn't call masturbation abuse, right? Because it's supposed to be self-gratificating. But then why is it that after masturbation, most people end up feeling dirty? They feel guilty. They feel ashamed. These feelings do not come when something is rewarding, if you understand what I mean. So we talked about heartbreak. And then finally, under emotions would be trust issues. And trust issues will fall back on heartbreak. Like I said, people who find themselves in addicted to unhealthy patterns of sex often or not find it very difficult to commit to a person, and as a result of that it brings about trust issues, not just even for the person that they're with now, for them, because I've been there. It was not even as a result of of unhealthy sexual patterns, but when you have been in a relationship with someone who has been or who is engaging in unhealthy sexual patterns, you also now start feeling any other person who comes, may also be like this person. And I said in the earlier broadcast that really didn't come out audibly. I said, we often find out, we do researches when we want to date or marry someone. We want to know their background, what tribe, what tongue, what religion, but nobody really does a complete background check on the person's sexual pattern, the person's sexual life. And you will never really get that truth from the person either, because it's not something people really feel comfortable about talking about, because you would hear, so how many people have you slept with? I don't think that's any of your business. How many people I've slept with? Why do you want to know? Okay, well, you tell me yours. And you see, so it's always a very uncomfortable conversation to have. And because of that, many people do not own up. So many people don't even know what they're getting themselves in or who they're getting themselves involved with. Is it someone who has a chronic addiction on sex? Because we have people who cannot do without it. They call them nymphos. But aside nymphomaniacs, we have people who just love sex. Their libido is very high, so any way they can get sex, whether it is through prostitution, whether it is through runs, paying for it, sex dolls, sex toys, pornography, masturbation, anyhow they can get it. They just need that urge. And you see, because you don't know, and it's not written on the forehead, oftentimes you find yourself involved with that person and you're wondering why that person is holding back on you emotionally, because that person is not completely with you, because their emotions are all over the place. And you see, trust issues is something that is very serious, because when you get married, like somebody says, once trust is breached, even if it's not marriage, even if it's just a relationship, it's very difficult to come from. And a lot of people have a lot of trust issues these days because sex has been abused in several ways, whether it is through you find people now sitting down, a husband and wife chatting in the same living room, holding phone, the other one is having a sex conversation or a sex chat with another person, or a guy is dating his girlfriend, moment she leaves, he's having video sex with someone else, or if you will, because I've been a victim of it, somebody just sends you a friendship request and you just get on Messenger and they're talking sex and they're showing you their privates and all that. I was talking to one of my daughters, and she was telling me, we're talking about the dangers of social media, and she was telling me, when she didn't understand when she was young, and I initially, and I was saying, no, for now, I don't want you on Facebook, I don't want you on anything, and somehow she found herself on it. And because you assume that everybody on social media is a nice person or a nice guy, a nice lady. She said before she knew it, she found people, or she was just sending requests. Oh, Indians were sending her requests, Chinese, foreigners, and so she was thrilled by that. So she accepted, not knowing what was going on. But then, some people, grown men, taking photos of their privates and sending, and asking, will you send? And she said the moment she just would just block and everything. And I believe it, because I have gone through that as well, and I know quite a lot of people, and I'm not just talking about women, I'm talking about men also go through things like that, where men also have women coming into their DM, taking photos of their breasts and their bodies, and sending it out there, is like, look at what you stand, so it's out there. And because you do not know who you are getting yourself involved with, once you play victim once, twice, it now becomes a problem. You now look at everybody as though you are a potential suspect. How am I sure? That's why we have a lot of people nowadays, you're in a relationship, you just feel the need to check your friend's phone, or your wife's phone, your husband's phone, your boyfriend, because trust issues. And you can't blame people, because people have abused, this thing called sex to the point where they put it out there. It's almost like a cheap commodity. It's one of the cheapest commodities for you to get your hands on these days. And so everybody looks at everybody with the "are you a potential suspect" eye. So trust issues is one of the emotional issues that we got. So, and the next would be physical. Now, I remember when I was talking to my daughters, and I would always tell them things like, when I started cautioning them about sex, and having early sex, out of wedlock, and preteen, teen sex, and I'd always tell them, using Bible scriptures, I tell them the least of your problem is pregnancy, right? Because with pregnancy, I mean, it's one or two things. This generation now pop pills to get rid of that pregnancy, like it's just taking Panadol or, Flagyl or what it is. Back then it was DNC, so everybody was afraid of going under, right? But now it's everywhere you go. I mean, getting pregnant is not a scary thing anymore. But here it is. We have a lot of people. I tell them, I said, pregnancy is not your problem, because I mean, you could decide to get rid of it and I'll probably never know. But STDs, other things that would destroy you, your future, you're not looking at the consequences of these things, because you could take those pills. What if it damages your womb? What if it renders you in a place where you can no longer give birth, even as an adult, right? When you're now ready to get married and have a child, or as a guy, you collect that STD, that life, or you just, a lot of things happen. So for physical, STD is one of the most common, and now there's so many out there. People are not even afraid of AIDS anymore. In fact, I was told recently that there's one that kills faster than AIDS, and all that. So the risks of STDs, the risk of unwanted pregnancies, bringing in children into the world, we have babies having babies. And I told you the story of a lady that her life ultimately changed because of one wrong decision of somebody who just made her feel like, look, if you love me, prove it. And after proving it, she got pregnant, and the person denied her completely. Now she's forced to drop out of school, raise a child, and has to get a job, because you have to feed your child, you have to clothe your child, and all that. And then if you're a young man that is even responsible, now you have a woman, a girl and a child to take care of. So that's extra mouth feeding, whereas you're supposed to go to school. So you find yourself, your life changes ultimately. So the risks of, and that's just from, random sex. I'm not even talking about the emotional damage it does to some people, because for some people it just destroys them. They can't find themselves anymore once they're into the world of masturbation. Nothing makes sense to them, and all that. Spiritually, I already talked about that, but I'm going to talk about that again. There's that loss of self-worth, self-value. I don't know about you, but as a Christian way back then, and as a young adult, I remember, allowing myself, to enter into that world, where I dated and then I allowed sex to enter inside. The truth of the matter is, people will pretend a lot. Everybody, like I said earlier, everybody is a saint when it comes to their own personal issues. Nobody wants to come out there and put themselves out there and make themselves look like they also had a past. But, I'm not one of those pretenders. I will tell you as it is. So as a young adult, yes, I did have sex out of wedlock. And I can tell you the truth. As a Christian, one of the things is the apart from the guilt, the shame, there is that feeling of you have betrayed God. There is that feeling of, lack of self-worth. There's that feeling of you have dropped standard. Do you understand what I mean? So that self-worth, that's disconnection. I want to get down on my knees and pray. I cannot pray without thinking about what I did. You go to church and you're hearing a message and you just feel as if, oh my God, pastor is calling me out, right? So there is all that. I want to talk about soul ties. I talked about it when we had the series on Let's Talk About Sex. Now, people say soul ties, they don't believe in all that. Oh, come on, how can I, because I sleep with somebody, the person in my soul is tied. But look, there is something much deeper in sex than just a guy pouring sperm into a vagina or you opening your legs for a guy. There is a spiritual connection. There is that connection that, when the Bible would say concerning Abraham, and Abraham knew Sarah, there is a knowing, and that knowing is not supposed to be permitted. That's why the Bible will also tell you the marital bed undefiled. Marriage is supposed to be the only reason where sex is endorsed. One man to one woman, where the two become one flesh. And we often look at couples, and I've seen many couples like that, where I would look at them and I would be like, oh, you know what, they look alike. There's no relationship between them, and there's no, in fact, their tribes are different, maybe even from two different countries. But because their souls have been knitted together, there has been exchange, they begin to even look at like each other physically. How much more spiritually? And somebody says, I don't get it, but you see, a lot of people have lost who they really are because of sexual indulgence. You get yourself wrapped up in that thing, and it becomes like a trap. You're sleeping with someone, you have no idea who that person is, but you are horny, so you enter a place, you drop money, you get on her bed, you sleep with her, you don't know the numerous men she has slept with, you don't know what she has collected from them, you don't know what is tied to her. And like I said earlier, as pastors, the Bible will tell us, oh, lay hands, do not lay hands suddenly on any man. That is, do not lay hands on somebody quickly, because there is a transfer of virtue even in laying on hands. How much more when someone gets inside you for intercourse? There is so much transfer. You're transferring spirits and you have no idea. And that's why the Bible will tell you, it says, he who joins himself with the harlot becomes one with her. So if you're one with her, it means already there is that connection. So how many people have you become one with because you jump from bed to bed? You may think it's just, oh, I follow them, I need the money, and the guys, I'm with chief this person, chief that person. You have no ideas how many ladies these guys are slept with. You are just there opening leg because he's dropping money. And then, young man, you have no idea who she's slept with. You're just jumping from one lady to another, and you think that it's not tampering with you, and you wonder why you are struggling in some certain things. And some people don't even understand why they get to a point. We have a lot of people who don't even live long anymore, and they don't even understand where they got that from. It's not in their bloodline. Trust me when I said that, sex, as beautiful as it is, can become a dangerous death trap for you. You don't want to allow yourself be roped into it. Now, I'm going to stop here. I have mental and relational, but I'll be taking that on Tuesday, like I said, because on Wednesday, unfortunately, I will be unavailable. So I'll be having it on Wednesday by 5:30, and we'll be talking about the mental impact and the relational impact of staying in this loop and circle of unhealthy patterns. So I'm going to stop here because my time is already gone, but I want to thank every one of you. Thank you, R. Windy Missouri. Thank you so much for being a very, very strong support and an encouragement. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Enejo Ajibogun. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure when I see you, and I think I saw Pastor Ish and a few others pop in and out. So I want to say thank you to everyone who took out time this wonderful Sunday to watch the rebroadcast. And I want to thank you again for those of you who took out time to, call me for reviews. I want to appreciate you so much. A parent called me over the week to talk about their young adult child and how they can be more involved in the life of that child, because after watching the video she was a bit worried about the child, and both her and her husband reached out, and it's like they want to see how they can be more involved in the life of their son to make sure that their son does not make costly choices in terms of sex. And then of course I had another person who reached out to me with the struggle of masturbation, and like I told you, if you continue watching the broadcast, eventually we'll get to how to break it, but at least I've started talking to you, and I want to believe that God will help you get out of that pattern and that circle for you to find yourself back again. And for those of you who are struggling and you have nowhere to talk to, please, you can slide into my DM. I'm available for you. I will be that listening ear, and I promise, trust me, with Bravi, we listen and we don't judge, because I've heard it all. So I am that shoulder that you want to cry on. So you can slide into my DM and let me know. We'll be here for you. And if you've not, again, subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do so. And if you enjoy what you're watching, please hit the share button and let's go viral. Thank you so much. I want to wish you a very wonderful and a fantastic week ahead. It's been awesome time with you as always. Please remember that Jesus is coming back very, very soon. Please be prepared. Don't allow it to take you unaware. Be that reason why somebody has a smile on their face throughout this week and not want to take their life. God bless you and much love.